And those of you who are from America will understand why it was the funniest thing I've read this year. And I'm quoting, "In Orban's Hungary, more than 90% of the media is controlled by the ruling party. Businesses are physically and legally harassed if they don't toe the party line. Listen, this gets better. Elections are manipulated. And my favorite, party leaders are mysteriously rich." And I thought to myself, wait a second, that sounds familiar. I live in that country. I live in a country where over 90% of the media are aligned with the ruling party. I have lived in cities. I know that if you were dumb enough to put up a sign in the window of your store in an American city disagreeing with the prevailing party orthodoxy on any one of a number of questions, whether it's immigration, human sexuality, who you're gonna vote for, you get your window smashed. If you disobey the political orders from the ruling party, they'll shut you down.
Here's a warning. Have you ever felt like your voice is disappearing? Like when you speak, no one listens. Tucker is a renowned journalist who stands for the truth and for America. Recently, Tucker expressed a sentiment that resonated as a foreboding caution. He spoke about feeling trapped in a world where expressing genuine thoughts is challenging. This raises a question. In a democracy where people have the right to make choices, should any voice be disregarded? How can we ensure that everyone's opinions are not just heard but also valued? Are we on the brink of losing our freedom?
I don't want to sound like a hawk, because I don't think I am, but I mean, I suppose the theory would be, if, let's say, Putin somehow takes over Ukraine, which again is doubtful, he would then be up against the Baltic states, some of which are some of NATO members. So how would you deal with that? Would you say that if he invades a Baltic state, does that become a different question?
I'm not sure I would deal with. I mean, as from the American, look, I'm an American. I have no other passport. I've got 4 kids, 4 dogs, and a house. I'm not going anywhere. So from my perspective, it's wholly American. And I think every country has a different perspective. That's why I was for Brexit, and each country should be able to represent its own perspective on the world stage. That's like a baseline view for me. So from an American perspective, I would say, is it, given the competing nature of interests, is it in the top tier of interests to prevent Russian expansion in Eastern Europe? I mean, it's not something you'd wish. You want free people to live in freedom. On the other hand, the freedom of people is threatened the world over. There are ongoing border disputes in Africa, the continent that I'm actually interested in, that have been, going on, grinding on, causing the deaths of literally millions for decades. And, that's sad. Nobody wants it to be the case, but is it in our interest to physically prevent it or try to? We also have a terrible record of actually affecting the desired outcomes. We just withdrew from Afghanistan this fall after the longest war in American history. And rather than pausing to ask, why didn't that go as expected? What are the mistakes we made? What are the assumptions that led to those mistakes? We're on to, contemplating an invasion of Russia during winter. Because that works. Anyway,
there's this very interesting.
I would ask the question, like, clearly the threats to the United States and the U.S. our interests, global trade routes, energy, pure military power, relative military power comes from China, of course. And so to the extent that you are focused on another region, given the size of our military, our attention span, the limits of our budget, you are detracting from that. And so the question is it worth it? And being American, we're not trained to think that way. We imagine everything is a possibility. The world's a menu of endless possibilities. We can do all of it. But the truth is we can't, never have been able to. There are limits, physics and money and reality that impose on you. And so, of course, I wish Latvia the best. I would feel sad if Latvia ever lost its autonomy, to the extent it actually has autonomy as a NATO member, but whatever. I would say to myself, that's sad. But is intervening, given the realistic possibilities of doing what we want to do, worth it, given that would detract from the real problems, which are East, not Eastern Europe, but Far East. So that's how I would think about it. I think that's a pretty moderate sensible, realistic way to think about anything. I don't think that's radical. I certainly don't think it's taking Putin's side. I have no special interest in any of this. I only care about my country.
Now, if you've been paying attention, you may have observed that Americans seem to be frequently overlooked by the Biden administration. However, Ukrainians are consistently on the radar of the American government. Let's delve into this puzzling issue. Why is there so much discussion about Ukraine? And why is President Joe Biden so invested in it? Does Ukraine require our assistance? Certainly, that's a critical issue. But shouldn't we also focus on the citizens of our own nation, the United States? They face challenges too, from securing stable housing, ensuring their children receive a quality education, to managing their financial burdens, including taxes. This draws attention to the relationship between Biden and the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. It could jeopardize our economy if our president prioritizes the well-being of other nation citizens over Americans. This might spell trouble for us.
Well, your bringing up of Christianity and Western culture brings up another accusation that is often made against you, which is that you are rousing the forces of ethno-nationalism. How do you respond when people say that to you?
That's one of those phrases that the sort of half-wits in charge of the Atlantic magazine throw around without thinking about. Ethno-nationalism? I don't know. I don't even know what my ethnicity is. I'm like half Swedish, half English, I guess. It's not of great interest to me, I can tell you that. I'm an American. I don't think in ethnic terms. I wasn't raised that way at all. And I still don't, and I resist all pressure too. Pressure mostly from the left to categorize myself and everybody as a member of some community or racial group. I hate that shit, and I will never participate in it. But I would say what's so interesting is that the same people who are saying, opposing war with Russia over Ukraine is ethno-nationalism are simultaneously making the case that Ukraine is for Ukrainians and that the Russians have no right to enter. So our country, we had 2 million immigrants, unauthorized, illegal, without documents, whatever you call them, come into this country in the last calendar year, 2021, 2 million. That's like 4 times the size of the city of Boston. That's a massive number of people, okay? Even in a country of 345 million. That's a lot of people, unprecedented. And the justification for this is, well, borders are racist. People have a right to go wherever they want in search of a better life. Here, I'm looking at tens of thousands of Russian citizens massed on the Ukrainian border, hoping to get in for a better life. And I'm seeing world leaders say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Ukraine is for Ukrainians. Speaking of ethno-nationalism, why is it, if we can import thousands of Haitians illegally, why is it such a lift for the Ukrainians to just, let several thousand Russians in? Obviously, I'm joking, sort of. Of course I'm joking. But I also think that's a ridiculous, speaking of ethno-nationalism, what's the largest ethno-nationalist nation in the world? Well, it's their closest ally, China. China is an ethno-state. It's run by and for the Han Chinese. Why do you think the Uyghurs are getting so much trouble? Why do you think that, the Mongolians and the Tibetans? Because they're not Han Chinese. No. So, look, I'm not, you run your country as you want. I'm not really much of a judger, actually. I judge my own country because I live here. But the same people, Bill Kristol was he's like an idiot. Ethno-nationalism, fascism. Okay, got it, Bill. A guy who couldn't even run a small circulation magazine is like, I'm in charge of American foreign policy. Think about what you're saying. It's like, it's ridiculous. And so there are many ridiculous people. I'm ridiculous sometimes, I get it. I have a high tolerance for ridiculousness. It's the seriousness with which ludicrous people are taken that really scares me. We have a big, important country. You can't allow dumb people to act stupidly without, reacting to it. It's like, what? It really freaks me out how mediocre our leadership class. It's not just that they're wrong, but they're like low IQ. It's like Bill Kristol is considered an intellectual. Really, on the basis of what?
Anyway, will we do well for our country if we have a president who is always sleepy and never takes us seriously? We need someone with a sharp mind to address the issues we face. Helping Ukraine in difficult times is commendable, but we also need to support our own people.
But what's interesting is the presumption in the United States is that it's, terrible to be an asset of Russia, but entirely acceptable to be an asset of Ukraine. And many, of course, in Washington are. The president's own son worked for a Ukrainian company, and the president himself was deeply enmeshed in the internal politics of Ukraine when he was vice president, and of course, still today. And I'm not sure why that's better. You know, no one in the United States ought to be an agent of a foreign power or promoting foreign interests at the expense of America's interests. I mean, in a democracy, it's very simple. The government exists to serve the people who put it in power by voting, and your foreign policy ought to reflect that, which is to say your foreign policy ought to serve the interests of the country. Now, if its ancillary effects are to improve the lives of others, then that's certainly great and virtuous. But if its primary goal is to serve the interests of other countries or their populations, then it's by definition illegitimate. I mean, that's the role of church groups and NGOs, and there are plenty of humanitarian organizations. But the U.S. military, the United States State Department, the White House, the U.S. Congress, even our media, exist for the benefit of the United States, period. And they've lost sight of that, and that's the core problem. So the argument I'm making against intervening between Ukraine and Russia, and we already have, by the way, we've sent billions in what we're now calling lethal weapons, as opposed to what, I suppose, but missile systems and small arms and all kinds of stuff to Ukraine and to neighboring countries. We're already funding a proxy war.
We know Tucker is telling the truth. His words always align with logic. That's why he was fired from the news company. Someone felt uncomfortable after hearing the facts. He is one of us. He wants what's best for our country. And that's the only reason he is striving as a political journalist. A journalist who is not aligned with a particular political party, but with the nation. And now, another warning about how our government spends money. Be alert, Americans, you are being fooled by your administration. Democrats seem to enjoy spending money on things they prefer rather than improving our country. Consider Biden and Obama as examples. While ordinary people like us struggle to afford everyday essentials, what do our leaders do with all the money they receive? They enrich themselves. As ordinary citizens, we work hard for our money, but where does it really go? How can we ensure our money is used the right way?
And I live in a country where Barack Obama, who has never actually had a paying job in the private sector, is now living on, a $30 million estate on an island off the coast of Massachusetts and throwing himself a birthday party, I believe today, with 200 servants. So I think we're checking the politicians become mysteriously rich box on that. So I read this and I think, and I am as patriotic American as you're gonna find. I'm not leaving. I will never leave, no matter what happens to the country. I don't have a foreign passport. I'm in. In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, because I have nowhere to go and I've got 4 children and 4 dogs. And they don't travel well. We're not leaving. So I am all in on America. And I think, this is a really dark moment in American history, but I think that it will improve. So I'm not attacking America, merely the current condition of America, when I say that I read that and I laughed out loud. Because it's hilarious. You're lecturing this landlocked Central European country of 10 million that has free and fair elections, which has a much healthier media balance. I'm sure every person in the front row is from the opposition media, whatever that is. I don't know, because I don't speak Hungarian, because it's a secret code inaccessible to those who weren't born speaking it. So there's a lot I don't know about Hungary, but I know a robust political system when I see one. No one in Hungary on the other side has to hire armed bodyguards. Lots of people in the United States do, I can tell you. You are living under physical threat if you disagree in a loud way. You are immediately censored if you're dependent upon social media to get your message out. I think America is the greatest country in the world. I will always think that, but don't tell me it's freer than Hungary, because that's a lie. So I read this and I find it hilarious, because it suggests not only a high level of stupidity, which after all these years in Washington I take for granted, because that's the soup I'm drinking, that's the world I live in, but it also suggests a total lack of self-awareness. A total lack. It is the equivalent of gaining 40 pounds and yelling at other people for being fat. It's insane. And I thought to myself, this is not just, contemptible, but it's also a sign of ebbing freedom, of freedom going away. When they ban humor, you're moving towards something dark. And they have banned humor in the United States. You are not allowed to laugh at things. Nothing is funny. Everything is dead serious. This tells us two things. Why do they do that? The first two things authoritarian movements do: first, they try to control your language, and second, they stop you from laughing. Why do they do that? Well, they control your language so they can control your mind. And those of you who were born speaking Hungarian, someone said to me the other day that Edward Teller, when he won the Nobel Prize, said, "I would not have won this if I didn't speak Hungarian, but because I do, my brain works differently." And I think a language as complex as Hungarian, totally indecipherable. I mean, I pick up Spanish going to Taco Bell. I've not picked up one word of Hungarian this entire week. I think it's true, especially for your language, but it's true for all languages. Words determine the way that you think. And if you take the words away, as Orwell famously noted in about 4 different books and 100 newspaper columns, you take away people's ability to think about things. So that's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is make it illegal to laugh, particularly at them. Now, why do they do that? Well, partly because they're thin-skinned and insecure, and that's why they went into politics in the first place, to prove something to their absent or alcoholic fathers. Granted. But there's a deeper reason for it, and that is that humor is perspective. How do you find something funny? By rising above it to a high altitude and looking down at its outline, by seeing things in their entirety, by looking up from the script and gazing around and noticing where you are and finding it hilarious. That just, in fact, happened to me. I was kind of in my own world texting with my wife, and I look up and I'm right across the Danube from Slovakia about to give a speech to people I don't know. And I thought to myself, kind of hilarious. Where am I? Not really sure. Enjoying it? Yes. And I laughed to myself because I had perspective. Perspective is the one thing they refuse to allow you. This is the way it is, this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it's going to be. Now, that's an obvious lie, but in order to convince you of it, they have to eliminate any reference to the past. They topple your statues. They tell you to shut up and stop talking about your family or your country. Be ashamed of what your ancestors did. Hate your history. They prevent you from having old words because old words describe old ideas. And above all, they prevent you from rising above the current situation and looking down to assess it clearly, otherwise known as comedy. So I'm not bragging when I say the United States has been, I'm 52, for my life, the single funniest country in the world.
As we conclude, we find ourselves surrounded by even more questions and topics of curiosity. These facts pose threats to our economy. Tucker's warning has paved the way for vital discussions. Americans stand to lose their freedom of speech and choice. Our citizens struggle to sustain their lives and livelihoods. Yet our administration seems more concerned with issues across the globe, spending our funds there. These questions are clear warnings about where our country is heading. We have the power to make choices, such as who should be the leader of our country. Let's hope we make the right choice for our nation in the 2024 elections.